Welcome to Shadow Fable, where the darkness whispers and the past lingers just out of sight. If you enjoy unsettling tales that creep into your mind long after the lights go out, be sure to subscribe. Tonight's story is one of forgotten secrets and the chilling truth that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. I never knew much about my grandfather. He was the sort of man people avoided talking about. Just a ghost in family photographs. His eyes always seeming a little too hollow, his presence in stories conspicuously absent. My father rarely spoke of him, and my grandmother, in her later years, would shake her head at any mention of his name, murmuring about things best left alone. I should have left them alone. But when my father passed away, and my uncle invited me to spend a few weeks at the old family home to help clear it out, curiosity got the best of me. The house was nestled deep in rural Pennsylvania, where the trees pressed in close and the air smelled of damp earth. It was a relic of another time. 2 stories of weathered wood, its windows sunken like tired eyes. I arrived on a dreary afternoon, the sky a flat, unbroken gray. My uncle, Thomas, greeted me with a distracted nod, ushering me inside with little fanfare. "I appreciate the help," he muttered, setting down a box of old papers. "It's mostly junk, but there's a lot to go through." The house felt wrong. Not haunted exactly, but heavy. The kind of place where silence had settled in like a permanent resident. And then there was the basement. I noticed it immediately, the door at the end of the hallway, half hidden behind a cabinet. Unlike the rest of the house, which smelled of dust and old books, the air near that door was different, colder, almost metallic. "Uncle Thomas, what's down there?" I asked. He stiffened. "Nothing." I waited, but he didn't elaborate. "Then why's it locked?" He turned, leveling me with a look I couldn't quite read. "There are some things in this house you're better off leaving alone." I let it go, for a while. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the windows, whispering through the trees like distant voices. And beneath it all, something else. A sound, faint, muffled, coming from the basement. I sat up, heart hammering. The house was old. It could have been pipes or the settling of the foundation. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like something moving. By morning, the noise was gone, but my unease remained. While my uncle was busy sorting through my grandfather's old study, I returned to the basement door. The handle was tarnished brass, cool beneath my fingertips. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. I tried turning the knob. It didn't budge. Frustrated, I stepped back, and that's when I noticed it. The keyhole. Not just any keyhole. This one was off. Wider than normal, as though designed for something larger than a standard key. And around it, faint scratches in the wood, as though someone had tried, repeatedly, to force it open. I spent the rest of the day trying to ignore the way my skin prickled whenever I walked past that door. It was the 3rd night when I found the journal. I had been searching through an old wooden chest in my grandfather's study when I discovered it, tucked beneath stacks of brittle newspapers, its leather cover cracked with age. The pages were filled with tight, meticulous handwriting. My grandfather's handwriting. Most of it was mundane, ledgers, notes about farm work, lists of repairs. But as I flipped further, the entries became strange. June 4th, 1967. It speaks less now. I think it's losing hope. Good. August 21st, 1967. It shouldn't have eyes. I covered them, but I can still feel it watching me. October 2nd, 1967. It stopped eating again. I don't know how it's still alive. I don't want to know. The last entry was dated nearly 2 years later. The ink was smeared, the words uneven, as though written with a shaking hand. May 14th, 1969. It knows I'm dying. I can hear it laughing. A chill ran down my spine. I reread the words over and over, hoping they would make sense. But the more I tried to rationalize them, the more they twisted in my mind, leaving me with one unbearable certainty. Whatever my grandfather had locked in the basement was still there. I didn't tell my uncle about the journal. Instead, I waited. That night, when he had gone to bed, I searched the house. My instincts told me that if my grandfather had kept something locked away, the key had to be nearby. It took hours. But finally, in the back of my grandfather's old wardrobe, I found it. A key, not an ordinary one. It was larger than usual, the metal strangely darkened, the teeth jagged. The moment I touched it, an icy sensation crawled up my arm, as though the metal itself was wrong. I stood there for a long time, staring at the key. Every part of me screamed to put it back, to forget about the door. But I couldn't. I had to know. Heart pounding, I made my way to the basement door. The house was silent, save for the steady creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. The hallway stretched before me, impossibly long in the dim light. I reached the door, slid the key into the lock, and turned it. The mechanism groaned, resisting as if it hadn't been used in decades. Then, with a sharp click, the door swung open. The air that rushed out was thick and stale, carrying a scent that made my stomach turn. Damp stone, rust, and something else. Something rotting. A single, narrow staircase descended into the darkness. And from below, a sound. Not movement, not whispering, but a breath. Slow, measured, waiting. I froze. The breath had been unmistakable, deep, deliberate, and wrong. It wasn't the unconscious exhale of a house shifting in the night. It wasn't the sigh of old pipes releasing trapped air. It was waiting. The open door gaped before me, a black mouth swallowing the dim glow from the hallway. My fingers tightened around the key. My rational mind screamed to close the door, lock it, and forget. But something deeper, something insidious, pulled me forward. The steps groaned beneath my weight as I descended. The air grew heavier with each step, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. The smell thickened, coiling in my nostrils, metallic, organic, a rancid sweetness that made my stomach twist. Halfway down, my flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath, tapping it against my palm. The beam sputtered weakly, illuminating jagged stone walls slick with dampness. The stairs ended in a packed dirt floor, uneven and furrowed like something had been dragged across it. At the far end of the basement, something loomed. A shape, hunched, motionless. I swallowed hard, lifting the flashlight. The beam wavered over rusted metal. A cage. And inside it, a figure. At first, my mind refused to process it. The shape was too still, too warped by shadow. But as the light settled, details emerged, thin. Skin stretched tight over protruding bones, the remains of tattered cloth hanging from skeletal shoulders. And the face, or what should have been a face, its head tilted slightly, as though it had heard my thoughts. My breath hitched. Then it moved. Not a shuffle, not a lurch. A slow, deliberate lift of its head. Its eyes, dear God, its eyes were covered. Thick, filthy bandages wound tightly around its skull, crusted with something dark. But beneath them, the skin bulged and shifted, as if the eyes beneath had never stopped looking. And then it laughed. A dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves scraping against pavement. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The laughter wasn't natural. It wasn't even human. It was deliberate, knowing. A voice followed, hoarse and broken from disuse. "You have his eyes." My breath stopped. The thing tilted its head further, lips peeling back over jagged, too white teeth. "And now, you've come back." My knees locked. It knew me. It recognized me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. I've never been here before." It exhaled slowly, the sound thick with amusement. "Haven't you?" A memory surfaced, faint, fleeting. My grandfather's voice, gruff and urgent. "Don't go near the basement, boy. It's not for you." My childhood self had obeyed. But now, standing here, the weight of those unspoken warnings settled on me with terrible clarity. This thing had been here for decades, and my grandfather. My stomach twisted. He hadn't trapped it down here. He had kept it, fed it, spoken to it, or worse. The journal's words echoed in my mind. It shouldn't have eyes. I covered them, but I can still feel it watching me. I staggered back. You're lying." The thing shifted, the bandages over its face dampening as something wet pushed against the fabric. "You left me here." My pulse pounded in my ears. "I don't know what you're talking about." It tilted its head. But he did. It meant my grandfather. My throat tightened. "Who? What are you?" The thing chuckled, voice raw. "You already know." It leaned forward, pressing against the rusted bars. The metal creaked. "I am the thing he could never bury." The air thickened, pressing in on me. And then the cage door shuddered. It wasn't locked. Panic jolted through me. The rusted latch wobbled, barely held in place. My grandfather had kept this thing locked up for decades, but now all it would take was a single push. The thing knew it too. It lifted one skeletal hand, dirt-caked fingers curling around the metal bars. Slowly, experimentally, it pressed forward. The latch groaned. My body moved before my mind caught up. I lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the cage and yanking the door shut just as it began to swing outward. The thing inside laughed. Not surprised, not afraid, amused. I fumbled for the key. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it, but I forced it into the old lock, twisting hard. Click. The door sealed. A breath of relief escaped me, but it was short-lived. The thing inside leaned close, inches from the bars now. I could feel its breath, warm and damp, seeping through the metal. "You think that matters?" it whispered. I backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet, up the stairs, fast. The door at the top still hung open. I stumbled through it, slamming it behind me. The key. God, where was the key? My fingers found it and twisted. The lock clicked. Silence. I braced against the door, breath ragged. Then, from the other side, a breath. Slow, measured, waiting. I left the house the next morning. Didn't explain anything to my uncle, just packed my bag and walked away, leaving the key behind on the kitchen table. I didn't need to warn him, he already knew. As I drove away, the house loomed in my rearview mirror, and for just a moment, just before the trees swallowed it from view, I thought I saw movement behind the basement window, watching, waiting.